On this episode of Now in Zen, we interviewed Saad Haddad, composer extraordinaire. He has his own YouTube channel and his own podcast, The Saad Haddad Show. Here he is.
I'd love to get more of your opinions on the profession of being a composer, because clearly it seems like composing is something you're very passionate about, not only because of your success as a composer with orchestras, but also the fact that you talk to other composers as well. One thing I'm wondering is how you approach the idea of microtonality in large groups, because I notice that a lot of your compositions feature microtones, and I think it's common to be afraid to use microtones in a large ensemble, because it's like the smaller the group, the more everyone's on board to do something a little bit non-12. But maybe you have unique approaches for selling that to Western orchestras, or you have some other methods to sort of assess whether you think they're ready for something like that.
Well, I mean, it's a big question to start out the gate, but with me, it's been like what I've been saying before. It's a slow process. I didn't figure this out the first time around. If we're talking about large ensembles, I probably have like 10, 11 pieces under my belt by this point, and I started writing microtones in music in general like at least 10 years ago, so it took a long time. But the thing with the microtones, I feel like, number one, with orchestras, I stick to a pretty minimal set of pitches that I'm going to use. I don't go crazy. I don't say I'm going to do a 31 EDO thing in this piece and everybody's expected to know what that is, right? I choose the usually 2, 3, 4 pitches that I really find, okay, these are the most important quarter tones or microtones, depending on what I'm doing in that piece, that are available to me. Actually, a big inspiration for me is the piece by Gérard Grisey, the Vortex Temporum.
Yes!
Because that piece only uses 4 quarter tones. And not just 4 quarter tones, they are in a specific, at least on the piano, they are a specific pitch class. I mean, you have only those 4 notes could be a down, quarter tone. And I really like that approach, because then it trains the listener too, that, okay, when we get to these notes, these are the notes that are in tune. These are not detuned notes. In fact, not mistuned, not detuned. They are tuned, right? They're in tune with the piece. So when I go to an orchestra, especially a conductor, and I explain to him or her what's going on, and they hear the way that I'm speaking about it too, in a kind of logical way, they get more on board with it, because they see that it's not just random. Like, I chose these notes specifically for this reason. Maybe I'm trying to hit these chords, or I'm trying to hit these maqam sets, which I do a lot of stuff with the Arabic scales and so on. So it's kind of like a multi-tiered approach, with the idea that by the end of it, I hope I can give a logical presentation to whoever is the conductor, especially, about why I'm using these microtones, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely does make sense. And I think that's an approach that has seen success in a lot of different ways. It reminds me of composers like Stephen James Taylor or Matthew Rosenblum, where it's like there's elements of 12-tone equal temperament where you keep a few of the core pitches, but then you make some of them microtonal. And it also reminds me of how people will do that with sometimes sets on the piano, like you've got a 12-note set, but certain notes are detuned. I think that the piece that you have that is based on that Grisey piece that's so fantastic is Vignettes, I want to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the piece that I literally took that set and I said, let me do it, my own version of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's good stuff. What the when you are writing microtones for orchestra, I was hearing the latest piece you had. It's the heartbeat piece. Is it called Aysheen, I think? That one?
Oh yeah. So I just posted on my channel. Aysheen, which is a piece I literally just finished like less than a few weeks ago, and I mailed it out to the LA Phil, who premiered they're gonna premiere the piece October 20 or so. But this thing was like a tremendous tremendous thing to figure out, because that clip you're talking about, the heartbeat short that I just put out, it's just a note performer rendering. I mean, it's not
Right.
It's not a real orchestra, obviously, but the it's funny because sometimes depending on what you write, note performer or whatever VST you're using actually does a pretty good job of rendering it. I think it sounds pretty close to hopefully what it will sound like. So I've never put out MIDI stuff. It's interesting because you were mentioning MIDI renderings before. I don't really do that. I see that there's a big niche on YouTube where people put out like MuseScore or note performer renderings of the music. I don't really do that just because I'm lucky enough to have live recordings of my stuff. But for whatever reason, I was going through this MIDI recording of the whole piece, and there was a composer that I met a few weeks ago at a festival in the Netherlands. I was at the Gdamis festival, and this composer was telling me, "My God, this is like the best MIDI recording of an orchestra piece I've ever heard." And I'm like, "Really? It's just note performer. I didn't do anything spectacular." So then it got me thinking, okay, let me put out the MIDI recording for everybody to hear. If this person thought it was worth it to hear, let me put out the whole recording. So that was the story behind me putting that recording out.
I think in the recording, we still get to hear the cool microtonal chord you've created. We hear like one of those rising built chords where you have a low harmony and then you build on it. But it's not just the harmonic series chord or the otonal chord, is it? It's slightly different. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the pitch language.
Yeah, so I mean, if you once you're done watching this, or maybe click off and listen to that video if you're watching this.
Yes.
What's going on is that I decided to come up with a new kind of harmonic class for this particular orchestra piece, and I'm really interested in figuring out different sorts of harmonies that work well with the Arabic maqam, which are this melodic framework that the Arabic music is based off of. And I do it slightly differently every time I write a new piece. With this particular one, my idea was tying it more to like what's going on today. Because I don't know if you struggle with this, but I struggle with this a lot, with writing music that not only is something that I'm drawn to, but what's something that's relevant for today.
Oh gosh, that's so hard.
Right, I know. It's hard, and oftentimes when people do it, it's like it doesn't come off as very authentic, or it just feels like they're just trying to ride the wave of what's going on. I mean, I know that sounds cynical, but that's just how I feel when I hear pieces like that, and especially if I don't like if I don't like the piece,
right?
It makes that feeling exponentially worse. But since we all went through COVID, we were all still going through it. I don't care what people say. I feel like on our field, it is still there in terms of the after effects. The wage decreases. And with orchestral players especially, a lot of orchestral players are still out of a job, or their wages have gone down significantly, their savings have been depleted, etc. So, I mean, I definitely feel for them in that way. And I wanted to write a piece that kind of expresses the idea that, we're still here, we're still living. So that's what the name of the piece is, Aysheen. It means living in Arabic. So going back to the actual music, my idea was, okay, we're living in a new normal. Right. So this is a term that we've been hearing all last 3 years or so. But I was thinking in my head, like, what would be the new normal in an orchestral context? So my idea what is like the most normal thing you could hear in an orchestra concert? And to me, that was the major chord. Every piece, unless it's in a minor key, it starts and ends in a major chord, right? So my idea was, okay, what if I took the major chord, and instead of having the regular major third take the major third and put it down a quarter tone, and you would get an approximation of the Rast scale, which is a mode in Arabic music where the third is down, basically a quarter tone from a major scale. So then I went a step further and I said, well, I want to apply that to the overtone chord. So instead of having like a normal overtone chord where the fifth partial is detuned, minus 14 cents or whatever it is, they're gonna, in an orchestra, they're just gonna play a normal fifth partial. Let's say like without a tune, an equal tempered version. They're not gonna play a minus 14 cents. But I thought, okay, what if I use that fifth partial and artificially put it down an additional 40 cents or so? So you get this chord where you have the third down a quarter tone, the fifth partial down a quarter tone. And that's all I did. That was the only difference. So every time you get a fifth partial, 10th partial, etc., you keep doubling that ratio there. You're going to get that slightly detuned fifth partial sound. So I was just tinkering with it on the piano, and I just loved it, and I just put it everywhere. So the entire piece has that. The sound permeates the whole piece to the point where there's a point like halfway through the piece where you get a big E minor chord, like a legit E minor chord. And that was, to me, I want it to be a huge shock when we get there. It's like, holy crap! Like, there's like a minor chord here, and it pops.
Yeah.
Way more than if I was just hearing it in a normal orchestral context, like with a standard repertoire type of piece. So that was the idea I had. I just ran with it the whole piece.
See, I love when people combine a slightly unfamiliar element with familiar elements to create new chords. I feel like that's a really fruitful avenue for exploration. And I know a lot of people have been calling that the neutral triad as well, like a third that's in between major and minor. So are you treating that then as a legit quarter tone right in between? Is that how you're writing it? Or are you trying to treat it as just interval? Are you thinking of any kind of in-tune ratios when you're doing that? Or are you just saying like, oh, there's a neutral third right there, and what's normally
Absolutely
a harmonic
not.
series chord? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely not. I'm not treating it with ratios. I'm not looking at it with any just intonation principles in mind, other than, this is going to be the neutral triad, and then there's an extension of that with the with whatever partials are going above it. Because for me, and I think this is something I learned from my teacher Georg Haas at Columbia, he treats the overtone chord as an artifact.
Right.
If that makes sense. He treats it as a sound. It's not a chord. It's not a functional chord. It's a sound.
Yeah.
So to me, once I start thinking about ratios, to me now I'm thinking functionally. And in an orchestral context, I think it's extremely difficult to do that because everybody has to be on board with what the ratios are actually doing and where they actually want to lead.
Yeah.
Unless you're working with someone like Jack Quartet with acoustic instruments, they're not really going to know what they're playing. They'll kind of try to play. I mean, they're professionals. They're going to try their best, but there's no way they could really sit there and study what's going on in 3 rehearsals the week of the show.
Right.
Unless you have someone like the Jack Quartet or an ensemble like that, or any of these like new music ensembles over in Europe that are really specialized in this kind of stuff. So you just have to be realistic with what you expect.
It's so difficult to play that kind of music, and then I think it can also be tricky because, like you said, appearing relevant, it's not easy to use microtones to do that, I think, in a lot of musical contexts. And so a lot of people think that if you try to learn to play microtones, it's hard because you've sunk so much time in, but there might not be very much reward in it, just because it's harder to put on those kinds of pieces. But I find it extremely rewarding, and I'm sure you do as well.
I think with me, the big difference with my approach is it's not about the microtones, which might sound kind of, backwards thinking. But if you approach, at least for me, if I approach a piece, I don't want to speak for anyone else. If I approach a piece and the microtones are at the forefront, like I really care about getting these exact tones and these exact ratios and these exact harmonies, I'm going to get stuck really quick. I'm going to be in quicksand. because I'm just never going to think about the other things that are important in a piece of music: form, melody, harmony, rhythm, affect. To me, I also think about emotional affect. How do I feel about a phrase? Does this phrase work well? Is it idiomatic for the instrument? All these other things that we have to think about as composers, I think, get lost in the weeds sometimes. And I noticed this too with a lot of composers that work with microtonality, and not just microtonality, but any kind of ism that you get into,
Right.
you know, it's really easy because you love it so much, right? To get in the weeds of that ism that you forget that there are other things to figure out in that piece of music that you're doing. So for me, I think that's been my saving grace. It's that, okay, I love microtones. Obviously, they're a big part of my music, but it's not the only thing. And I think that's what's helped me, keep moving from one orchestra commission to the next, is this kind of mindset.
Absolutely. I certainly agree with you, and it's very easy, to get really fixated on particular parameters, because like microtones are so new that they might not be thinking about those other parameters.
Microtones have been around, for thousands of years. It's just been, I think what's new is that we've been able to render them so accurately in especially the last 10, 15 years with technology. I think that has been the big difference. And with that, there's kind of a danger too, because these renderings of the microtones through electronic means, you lose a little bit, I think, when you do that too, because you don't get some of the acoustical features that you get when acoustic instruments are doing some of these, especially when you hear beating across different instruments. And that's something, some of these European composers do really well when they work with acoustic instruments and microtonality. So that's what I struggle with actually a lot, is when I get into electronic music, I have a lot of trouble like amping myself up for working with electronics, because I know that I'm going to be dealing with the acoustical space in a much different way than I'm used to, because I'm so used to working with acoustic instruments all the time.
Absolutely. That's a great observation. Yeah, you definitely get conditioned to hear things a certain way if they're only rendered back via electronics. And yes, I agree with you there about microtones not being new. I was pointing it out in kind of a relativistic sense to some of the Western music public in recent memory, because of course,
Oh yeah.
historically we know that 12-tone equal temperament is a very recent invention, kind of in the league of anything else in the Industrial Revolution. It's just this tiny blip. And so, I'd really be interested to hear, of course, more about your non-Western music influences as well, and how you incorporate those into your music. So, do you have any examples of that you're particularly proud of, or you think demonstrate particularly well non-Western influence?
I mean, in terms of people that I'm extremely inspired by, it's those folks that are from right when the recording age started to happen in about the 1910s, 1920s in Cairo, in Egypt, because that's where all the recording was getting done. And a lot of films, big like Hollywood-esque films, were being made in Cairo, where you had these big Western orchestras actually being the soundtrack for all these films that were basically musicals. So you had people like Kulthum, Farid al-Atrash, people like this, where they sang these there are, let's put it this way, they are our closest, I guess, evidence of what Arabic music sounded like, right? Because Arabic music has been going on for thousands of years, but we haven't had recordings, and there wasn't anything written. It's an orally passed down tradition. So for us to get the closest to what they were doing hundreds of years ago, that is the closest that we have. And even during their time, their music was getting quite westernized quite rapidly. And by westernized, I mean the addition of Western instruments. You have string instruments. You even have instruments like the electric guitar getting added in. And you have composers like Muhammad Abdul Wahab, adding in literal triads and things like Western triads in the music, backing up these melodic, microtonally inflected melodic singing phrases. It's just amazing to me that it happened so quickly. So there was like a blip in time, I would say like a 20-year blip in time, where we were getting like as close to what it was like before there was like this Western infiltration of the music. And by the way, a Western infiltration that I want to add that was kind of welcomed too by the Arabic composer. It wasn't something that was imposed on them. It actually was quite the opposite. Many of the the Western composers and musicologists, people like that, they didn't want the Arabic composers to be incorporating the Western music, but the Arab composers wanted to. There's kind of an interesting dialogue going on there. You would think it's the opposite, but that's not what happened. So I really like this idea because to me I'm like, to me, I'm a Western trained composer. You know, I went to USC, I went to Juilliard, I did my doctorate at Columbia. You know, I'm like completely in the Western education system, right? But to me, I'm thinking, okay, how do I infiltrate the Western system with some of this Arabic music? So I have this opposite mentality about it. So I think it's really interesting to see myself in that way as part of that tradition. And that's what keeps me going, to be honest with you, because to write piece after piece after piece, it's exhausting. It's really hard. And to do it by yourself, like here in my basement, you know, there's not much collaboration going on when I'm writing these things. That's really what keeps me going, because I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I close the loop with the music that I'm writing? So I don't know if that answers the question. I kind of went on a rant there, but that's what I'm really inspired by, like creating that closed loop with these people that wrote music or were engaging with this music like 100 years ago.
Yeah, I think in a general way, it's like you're trying to bring things full circle in a way that the modern era will accept. It makes me think about how a lot of times, you know, the zeitgeist can be boiled down to traditions infiltrating each other and kind of keeping things circulating so that you don't get too myopic and focused on one particular aesthetic idiom or idea. So yeah, I think that's really inspiring. And I also wonder about your, like, with maqam music and everything. I know that maqam scales, they have like sort of rules that are associated with them melodically that have to do with how they might modulate to one another or how they might be used musically. Are you sort of interested in using those kinds of rules when you compose, but within a Western tradition, or are you taking the scales away from those rules? I'm wondering what your approach to including maqam is from a perspective that may not just come from the scale itself, but might involve other musical parameters.
Right, the actual framework.
Yeah, I'd be very
the
curious.
framework.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's very complicated because a lot of what's going on with the maqam music, a lot of it is quite fixed, actually. So, and I think a lot of composers that I know run into trouble with this, is that there's something called a sayr, S-A-Y-R. And what this is it's a shape for your melody or your tune to go in. And usually what happens is you start from a tonic, you kind of go up to a fifth or so, then you go back down, maybe you go underneath and then come back up to the tonic, and so on. And this is really how all the melodies should be acting. They shouldn't be acting in any other way. There is a flow it has to go up and down to. And to me, this is quite limiting, because if I keep doing this over and over, like number one, it's not exciting for me to do, because these singers have been do that way better than anything I could do, because they're just used to doing it. And there's a poetry also that goes well with this kind of flow, this kind of rise and fall. And also emotionally, it's the affect is quite limited, I think, for all the kinds of affects I'm trying to reach. So that's number one. The second thing you mentioned is modulation. I'm still trying to figure this out. I wrote a couple pieces where I kind of took out the modulation question entirely by superimposing the way that Bach modulates.
Oh, interesting.
I just took a chord progression from Bach. I think it was one of his inventions in F sharp minor, but then I tuned it up a half step to G minor so I can have the string quartet do it.
Yeah.
And I was aware that the modulation is relatively limited, right, compared to Western music, compared to functional harmonic practices in Western music. So my idea was to nix the modulation question entirely by superimposing the Bach progression. So I think I haven't figured out how to do it with the Arabic rules, but as you can tell from this conversation, I think the trick is, at least for me, to be aware of what the rules are, but then break them immediately.
Yes.
So that I don't have to like deal with it on a directly, if that makes sense. It's kind of cheating. I guess I have to admit.
Or I wonder if anyone has taken, say, a Bach piece and modulated it through maqam rules, the inverse of what you described.
That's interesting too. That would be interesting too. Although the problem with that is that you would recognize that it's Bach, but it kind of like, but the other problem is if you're not using some of the microtone, like if you're just going to use the Bach,
Right.
whatever temperament he was in, but then use their modulation techniques. The problem with it is the way they modulate, it's usually to very closely related keys, and you're kind of limited to some of the. You're limited to like D, G, A as tonics, pitches like that, because that's how most of the instruments are tuned. So that's another reason why I avoided their modulation practices, is because it's limited to kind of a few key centers that I can go to based on the instruments that they play in that part of the world. So, yeah. One day I'd really like to actually write a piece for Oud or Kanun or Dene or any of these kind. That would be super interesting to me. I just haven't had the opportunity yet to meet someone that has that wants to collaborate in that way with whatever I'm doing, because it needs that sort of collaboration needs both parties to be on the same wavelength, because there are going to be some things that they don't like that I'm doing. And vice versa, right? It's not going to be completely one way or the other. So I haven't got to that point yet, but that's why we live this composing life, or whatever you want to call this. It's just a never-ending journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any maqams that you particularly like, or that sound particularly microtonal?
The one that particularly microtonal is a different question, but. The one I use a lot is the Ra scale, the one I mentioned before, which has the third down a quarter tone. It's not really a quarter tone. It depends on it depends who you ask, how far down it is. But that one I use a lot, and depending on how you go up and down, the seventh is changed as well. So it's almost like it's akin to like kind of a melodic minor type of scale. Sometimes it's a little sharper on the way up and flatter on the way down. So that's an interesting comparison. And the other one I like a lot too is the Bayati scale, where the second is tuned down a quarter tone. So I really like the ones actually that you can tell the difference around the tonic, because that's where the real oral arguments can be made. In my view, because if it's away from the tonic, it's less obvious what's going on, and it's harder to get into that sound world if the microtone is not close to the tonic.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Do you have which of your teachers would you say really influenced your microtonal philosophy? I know you mentioned Haas earlier.
Haas is a big influence, obviously. More for, obviously, he writes a lot of microtonal pieces for the orchestra. So getting his sense of how he deals with the orchestra in that way was really helpful. And honestly, just looking at a lot of scores of Haas, too, might have been the most helpful, because then you can get really nitty and gritty and see how he does things. I mean, the biggest difference with me and him in our approaches is that he's really concerned with the sound of the beating of the quarter tone interval, like the literal C to C half sharp interval. I'm not that concerned with that. I like the more open sounds, the thirds, the sixths, those kind of things. So that's the big difference. I'm really big into Chelsea. Obviously, I'm big into Grisey, those spectral composers. And I mean, I'm sure there are many others that are just not coming to me. Obviously, Ben Johnston, people like that. So James Tenney, oh God, I love James Tenney.
Yes.
I mean, I feel like he's like kind of underrated, but that guy is like a genius in my eyes. So I mean, he was. I mean, in terms of like a living teacher that I went back and forth a lot with, it was him. I studied with John Corigliano for a couple of years too at Juilliard, and there are some people might be surprised. I don't know how many people in your audience know John Corigliano.
Maybe some.
Yeah, but it's actually shocking because he's like a huge name in the symphonic world, but when I tell some people in Europe about him, they don't know who he is. It's just like, to me, it's like astounding how one major figure in classical music is not really known by people that listen to the other major figure in classical music. I don't really. It's astounding. Anyway, that's another side rant. But with Corigliano, he uses microtones in some of his pieces too, but they're done more for a timbral effect. It's just like he has a piece with oboe, the oboe concerto, where he has. He's mimicking actually the reita sound, which is kind of like this Arabic instrument, and when he's taking out the reed of it and he plays in it directly, and obviously there's a lot of microtonal shadings going on there, but it's for a timbral effect. It's not like he's trying to get chords and picking out specific pitches. So to me, it's like, what do I like, what I don't? What do I like from my teachers? What don't I like from my teachers? And then finding what I like. I think that's my how I've kind of taken the information from my teachers from the past.
Do you have any tips for aspiring composers who want to get their music played by more large groups or more established groups?
It was extremely hard in the beginning, obviously. I would say that, and this is something, because on my channel I talk a lot about these kind of things too. I would say the biggest thing is, especially, it obviously depends on how old you are, what stage you are. If you're a young composer, if you're someone like from out of high school, let's because it's different advice for different groups of people. Mm-hmm. If you're someone out of high school, my biggest and I'm about to write it. I'm probably going to make a video about this soon because it's the college application season now, and I'm tired of hearing the same thing from people that I have lessons with. Sometimes it's kind of frustrating with students, because I was in the same predicament, that when you go to a school, number one, you want to make sure that you're not in debt, first of all, that you don't go into debt from going to school. So that way you have some extra cash flow if you're making money, if you have a side job, something like that, so that you can start building your portfolio of you're talking about ensemble pieces. There's no way that an orchestra or an ensemble, a professional ensemble, will ask you to write them a piece if you don't have some pieces already written in the can before. Right. And the best way to do that is to have some pieces that you've done while you were in school, right? Yes. So that's kind of the problem. And once you're out of school, it's another thing entirely, another conversation entirely. But when you're in school, the name of the game, in my opinion, is to write as many pieces as you can, record as many pieces as you can. And if you're going to a school where the tuition is quite low, you're in-state, or you have a scholarship, any of these things, even if it's not a Juilliard, right, you're still going to get a lot out of that, because the musicians there will be really good, and you'll be able to record these pieces so that when the time comes that you can, submit to a competition or something like that for a large orchestra, you have some things in the can. You've had some experience writing for acoustic instruments, because trust me, if you let's say you win the lotto and you're an 18-year-old writing for the LA Phil, and that's your first gig, right? Let's just say as an experiment, you're not going to be happy when you go and show up to your rehearsals, because there was so much information that would have been great for you to learn before you got there. Like you're not ready for that opportunity yet.
Right.
So there are steps to this, and that's what I tell people all the time. You only see the finished product, right?
Right.
And I don't see myself as a finished product by any means, but to people 10 years younger than me, 15 years younger, that's how they see it. But that's not how it is at all. So those are the steps that I recommend, and to be patient about it too, because once you get there, you might not like it. That's the other thing. You'd be like, oh, this orchestra thing is not for me. 2 rehearsals, 3 rehearsals, 1 concert. I worked for 3 months straight with no sleep, and I for a couple times that I heard it, maybe that's not for you. And I know a lot of composers where that's not for them, and they don't want to touch it. A lot of people I respect don't want to touch it. So that's the other thing to consider about writing for large ensembles, orchestras too.
This is kind of, I think, the path I've gone down. Like, as I've been wanting to do more with microtonality, and I'm impatient and want to realize the sounds myself more than I want to put the performances on. I'm like, oh wait, I can just play everything myself. And then it just, it becomes less of a pressing need for me to write for a large group, and it's very intimidating. But I think your message offers a glimmer of hope, because it can be tempting to think that the only people who get these opportunities are just people who went to the school with the most name recognition.
Let's be clear. I went to USC, I went to Juilliard, I went to Columbia. I'm. So people might think that I'm, kind of hypocritical with what I'm saying, because I went to those schools, right? But USC was my local school. I grew up in Los Angeles, number one. I did all my schooling. I did public school, all of that stuff in Los Angeles. And actually what happened was, I swear to God, this is the best decision probably that was ever made in my life, and I didn't make the decision. It was my parents. When I was 17, I had a decision to make. I had a full scholarship to USC. Okay,
wow.
Full scholarship, tuition and everything. I was like valedictorian or whatever in my high. I had good grades and all that jazz. Okay, and I had some pieces that I wrote for the high school band, stuff like that. So there's that, and then I had this opportunity to go to Columbia as an undergrad and take lessons at Juilliard. Right now, that was $70,000 a year in tuition, about $70,000 to go to both schools. And that's what I wanted to do. I said, I want to go to New York. I was 17, 18. I want to go there, and I like all the shiny lights of, the shiny diamonds of going to Columbia, Juilliard. Wow, that's as someone that grew up in LA their whole life. The best decision that ever was made, was my parents saying, hell no, you're going to USC. You have a full ride there. That's a great school. You keep your butt here. And then after 4 years, you want to go to Juilliard, you want to go wherever, you apply. And it's just been, and now I have a degree from Juilliard and I have a degree from Columbia. And the only one I had to pay for was the Juilliard degree. Everything else, the Columbia degree, they paid me to go there because I taught there. So it's just worked out extremely well. But I don't know where I would be if I chose the path of paying all that tuition.
Right.
I you know what I'm saying? That would have been $300,000 or so down the toilet. So I urge everybody, whoever's watching this, don't be attracted by the shiny, diamond of going to a huge school where you have to pay a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Do your undergrad somewhere that's preferably local, preferably in-state, preferably low tuition or scholarship. Then if the composing thing is still something you want to do, you can always go do your master's. Everybody is going on and doing their master's anyway. So then you could try for one of those, Indiana, Michigan, USC, Juilliard, whatever, Yale. I mean, there's like 10, 15 of these programs, I would say, that are worth applying to for your master's. So
like Indiana University?
Would be my advice. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
the
'cause
Jacob School.
I live in Indiana.
No, it's a great. I mean, I know a lot of great composers that came out of there or did their doctorates there,
Yeah.
and it's a great school.
Yeah.
So I anyway, that's my again. Sorry, this has been a series of rants from my end.
No, this is great. We love the rants at Now and Zen.
Yeah, apologize for that, but yeah, I just have really strong beliefs about this stuff because I've seen people come and go, and I've seen people rise and fall, and I've seen it all basically by this point. I've seen kind of what works, and I've seen what works for other people, and the common denominator seems to be the money factor.
Yeah.
If you can stay afloat while you're doing this, like I said, it's a 20-year. In my opinion, a 20-year ascent, if that's what you really want to do, whether you want to be a professor, whether you want to be, the next Andrew Norman or whatever, it will take 20 years. That's just how long it will take.
Yeah,
So,
regardless. Yeah.
yeah. So the passion, that's fine. I mean, you're going to have days when you're not passionate, okay?
Oh, yeah.
But having many days in a row where you can't be financially stable because of a decision that was made when you were really young, when you were 17, 18, that maybe you or your parents didn't know better, that is going to keep going.
Right.
So the passion can go up and down, but the financial stability, that's really hard to get out of, unless you like completely do another field besides music. So, yeah, it's just a real little real talk for whoever is still listening, like an hour in or so into this thing.
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Where should people go to check out your music, support you, things like that?
The biggest thing is my channel, Saad Haddad. You just go there and peruse whatever you like there. I have like 300 plus videos or so. So if there's anything that I have videos about, I have tutorial videos, I have videos about school, business, and of course I have all that music. All my music is up on that channel. So that would be the best way to do that. I have a podcast like you do, the Saad Haddad Show. It's on Spotify, Apple, all that stuff. I don't have as many episodes as you yet. I have like 30 or so episodes, but I'm doing about one a week, so hopefully I'll catch up to you soon.
Oh, you will, yeah, because I'm not doing that anymore.
Oh, you're not? Okay.
The piece you're listening to right now is Aysheen, which Saad wrote for the LA Philharmonic and was performed recently. This is a demo recording using Note Performer. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to Now and Zen. It's always appreciated. We are here to spread the love of microtonality. A special thanks to those at our Patreon account, the Zen Harmonic patrons, as well as the Zen Harmonic gods. Naren Rattan, Mike Battaglia, Adam Fries, Matthew Sheeran, Vincenzo Sicarella, Hector McGuffin, Christopher Bailey, Leland O. Weigel, Amy Coleman, Joe Weigel, and Tina Harmon Carto. Episodes in the near future will feature Matthew Sheeran, Christopher Otto of the Jack Quartet, and Noah Jordan.